there is a particular category of scientific problem that does not get enough attention. Not the problems where we know the answer and are arguing about the details. Not the problems where we have a strong hypothesis and are waiting for confirming evidence. The category I am talking about is the one where something real and physical and measurable sits in front of researchers, and the honest answer to the question of what caused it is, we do not know. Not we do not know yet, with the confident implication that the answer is coming soon. Just we do not know. Full stop. Those problems are rarer than science communication usually suggests, because the culture of research tends to reward certainty and punish the admission of genuine ignorance. But they exist. In Australia, with its ancient geology, its vast unexplored interior, and its prehistoric record that keeps producing evidence nobody predicted, has more than its share of them. Every site on this list has been studied by credentialed researchers using legitimate scientific methods. Every one of them has produced evidence of destruction, transformation, or erasure by forces that the scientific community has not yet reached a consensus explanation for. Some of the debates are close to resolution. Some of them have been running for decades with no clear end in sight. And some of them sit in the literature as open questions that the next generation of researchers will inherit from this one. Still unanswered, still generating data, still refusing to resolve into the clean explanatory narrative that everyone working on them would prefer. These are not mysteries in the supernatural sense. They are mysteries in the best scientific sense. The evidence is real. The explanations are contested, and the process of working toward answers is producing knowledge about this continent and about the forces that have shaped it that nobody was looking for when they started asking the original question. Number 8. Henbury meteorite craters and the fire that fell from the sky. In the arid heart of the Northern Territory, approximately 130 kilometers southwest of Alice Springs, there is a cluster of 12 impact craters spread across a few square kilometers of desert that represents one of the best preserved meteorite impact fields in the world and one of the most archaeologically significant. The Henbury craters were formed by the impact of an iron meteorite that broke apart in the atmosphere and struck the desert surface approximately 4,200 years ago, well within the period of human occupation of the region and close enough in time to recorded Aboriginal oral traditions that the question of whether the impact was witnessed by people has been taken seriously by researchers. The dating of the Henbury impact, established through multiple independent methods by teams including work published by researchers at the Australian National University, places it squarely within a period for which we have substantial evidence of human activity in the region. The craters range from 6 to 180 meters in diameter and reach depths of up to 15 meters, and the energy released by the impact sequence was sufficient to ignite vegetation across a wide area, to melt and spray the desert surface into glass spherules, now scattered across the surrounding landscape, and to produce a shockwave felt across an area of many thousands of square kilometers. For any human community within sight of the impact, it would have been an event of absolute, civilization-altering terror. Fire from the sky, the ground shaking, a sound that made thunder irrelevant. The Aboriginal name for the site, Terra Terra, or Thinula, depending on the language group, has been translated in various ways by researchers, including Robert Pullen, in early survey work on the site, with interpretations that some have connected to concepts of fire falling and fear. The oral traditions of the Araranti people, whose country encompasses the Henbury site, include accounts of fire devils descending from the sky that some researchers have cautiously examined as possible cultural memory of the impact event. What science cannot yet explain cleanly is the precise distribution of human activity around the craters in the centuries following the impact. The archaeological survey of the Henbury region, incomplete by the standards that modern research would apply, shows patterns of site abandonment and reoccupation that do not follow the simple logic that either permanent avoidance or immediate return would predict. Something happened to the communities of this region when the fire fell. How long it took them to understand it, to incorporate it into their knowledge of the world, and to return to the transformed landscape around the craters, is a question the archaeological record has not yet answered with the resolution the question deserves. Number 7. The Sidveringa silica glass field, and an energy source nobody can agree on. In the remote Gibson Desert of Western Australia, and extending into South Australia, scattered across an area of thousands of square kilometers of sand dunes and desert pavement, there are fragments of a pale, yellow-green, natural glass that has been known to Aboriginal communities in the region for thousands of years, and that scientists have been arguing about for the better part of a century. The Australasian tektites, also known as australites, are aerodynamically shaped glass objects, some with the characteristic button or lens form produced by ablation during high-speed atmospheric passage, found across a strewn field extending from Australia through Southeast Asia and as far as Antarctica, covering approximately 10% of the Earth's surface. They were formed approximately 790,000 years ago, and their origin, the mechanism that produced them, and the location of the impact or event responsible, has been debated since their scientific description in the 19th century. The specific glass I want to focus on here is different from the australites, though related in the questions it raises. Like tellurite and other forms of siliceous glass, found at certain locations in the Australian interior, formed by the fusion of desert sand under conditions of extreme heat, represent evidence of energy deposition at specific sites that researchers have not been able to attribute with consensus certainty to any single identified event. The debate involves multiple hypotheses. A large bolide impact whose crater has not been found, possibly because it occurred in a region of deep sediment cover that has obscured the surface expression. An aerial burst, a Tunguska-type event in which an extraterrestrial object exploded in the atmosphere without creating a conventional crater, depositing its energy across a wide area as thermal radiation and shockwave. A volcanic event from a source not yet identified in the Australian geological record. Each hypothesis has researchers who support it and researchers who contest it. And the evidence, while real and physical and measurable, has not yet forced a consensus. For the human communities who lived in the region where this glass was formed, the event that created it, whatever it was, would have been one of the most extreme and disorienting experiences their culture had ever encountered. Sand turned to glass. Desert pavement fused into sheets of material, unlike anything in the natural environment they had spent generations learning to read. The glass itself, collected and transported by Aboriginal people across trade networks spanning thousands of kilometers, became a prestige material, sharp enough for specialized tool use, and strange enough in its origin to carry a weight beyond the purely functional. The force that created it remains, in the precise scientific sense of the word, unexplained. Number 6. The Goss's Bluff Impact, and the community that disappeared. In the western McDonnell Ranges of the Northern Territory, in the country of the Western Arrernte people, there is a circular formation of hills, approximately 5 kilometers in diameter, that rises dramatically from the flat desert plain, and that was for many years interpreted by European observers as a volcanic caldera or an unusual erosional feature. It is neither. Goss's Bluff, known as Torala in the Arrernte language, and holding deep significance in Arrernte cosmology, as the place where a baby fell from the Milky Way during a dance of ancestral beings, is the eroded remnant of the central uplift of a meteorite impact crater, approximately 22 kilometers in diameter, formed approximately 142 million years ago, when an asteroid or comet, approximately half a kilometer in diameter, struck the Australian continent. The research establishing the impact origin of Goss's Bluff, including core sampling and structural analysis by the Australian Geological Survey Organisation, and published work by researchers, including Richard Grieve, at the Geological Survey of Canada, and Australian colleagues, is unambiguous. What is not unambiguous, and what belongs on this list, is the relationship between the site and the human communities who have lived in its shadow for at least 40,000 years. The Arrernte cosmological account of Tunarala, a baby falling from the sky, the body creating the circular landform, the parents searching across the landscape, is not a scientific explanation for the crater's formation, but it preserves, in its structure, the recognition that something fell here from above, that the circular form of the landscape is connected to an object descending from the sky, in a way that researchers including Dwayne Hamaker at the University of Melbourne, who has spent years examining the intersection of Aboriginal astronomical knowledge and geological evidence, have found genuinely significant. The force that created Tunarala struck 142 million years ago, long before any human eye was present to witness it. But the landscape it created has shaped human life in this region for the entire duration of human presence in Australia. And the communities who built their cosmology around it understood something that took Western science until the 20th century to recognize, that the circular hills of Tunala are the scar of a collision between the Earth and the sky. Number 5. The Lake Acraman ejecta layer, and the biology that never recovered. In the sedimentary sequences of the Flinders Ranges in South Australia, and in corresponding sequences in the Adelaide geosyncline examined by researchers including Victor Gostin at the University of Adelaide and colleagues, there is a distinctive layer of material whose origin, once recognized, represents one of the most violent events in the entire 4.5 billion year history of the Australian continent. The layer contains shocked quartz, mineral glass, and fragments of rock whose geochemical fingerprint matches the basement geology of the Galera Craton, the ancient crustal block at the center of South Australia, where a 90-kilometer impact crater called Lake Acraman records the scar of a bolide impact approximately 580 million years ago. The ejecta from this impact was distributed across an area of at least 350 kilometers in every direction, meaning that the energy released was sufficient to loft cubic kilometers of rock into the upper atmosphere and scatter it across an area larger than France. What makes the Lake Acrimon impact scientifically extraordinary, beyond its sheer scale, is its timing. It occurred during the Ediacaran period, the interval of geological time when the first complex multicellular life on Earth was diversifying and establishing the biological foundations of every animal lineage that would follow. The ejecta layer sits within sequences that contain Ediacaran fossil assemblages, and researchers examining the fossil record immediately above and below the layer have found evidence suggesting a biological disruption at the impact horizon, a change in the diversity and abundance of Ediacaran organisms that may reflect the ecological consequences of the impact. What science is still trying to explain is the precise relationship between the Acrimon impact and the Ediacaran extinction, the event at the end of the Ediacaran period that eliminated most of the strange, soft-bodied organisms of that world and cleared the ecological stage for the Cambrian explosion. Whether the Acrimon impact contributed to that extinction, whether it accelerated an already preceding decline, or whether its effects were local and temporary rather than global and permanent, is a question that the sedimentary record has not yet answered definitively. The rocks of the Flinders Ranges that contain this history are among the most scientifically significant geological formations in Australia. And the question of what the Acrimon impact did to the world's first complex animals is one that researchers will be working on for generations. Number 4. The Pilbara vitrified surfaces and the heat that has no explanation. In the ancient iron-rich landscape of the Pilbara region of Western Australia, among the banded ironstone formations and the river gorges cut through Archean rock, more than 3.5 billion years old, researchers examining the surfaces of certain rock formations have identified areas of apparent surface fusion, zones where the iron-rich rock surface has been altered in ways consistent with exposure to extreme heat, at locations and in configurations that existing geological explanations have difficulty accounting for. The research on these features is limited and preliminary. It does not constitute a settled body of literature, but the researchers who have examined specific outcrops in detail, including work referenced by Robert Bednarik of the Australian Rock Art Research Association in publications examining the long-term weathering of rock art surfaces in the Pilbara, have noted surface characteristics that raise questions about the thermal history of these rocks that conventional weathering and geological process models do not cleanly answer. The Pilbara is the oldest exposed surface geology on Earth, and the rocks of the Hamersley Range contain formations that have been at or near the surface for billions of years. The thermal events that could produce surface fusion in iron-rich silicate rock include lightning strike, vitrification, which is documented and well understood, contact with extremely high-temperature wildfire, which can fuse certain soil and rock surfaces under specific conditions, and forms of impact-related thermal deposition whose signatures are more difficult to identify without the distinctive shocked mineral assemblages that accompany conventional crater-forming impacts. What science is still trying to explain at specific Pilbara localities is which of these mechanisms, or what combination of them, produced the surface characteristics observed. It is important to be precise here. This is not a case of scientists being mystified by something that defies known physics. It is a case of scientists having multiple possible explanations that the available evidence cannot yet distinguish between, a situation that is far more common in fieldwork geology than the confident certainty of textbook science suggests. Number 3. The Bungle-Bungles, erosion anomalies, and the landscape that should not exist. The Purnululu National Park in the Kimberley region of Western Australia, inscribed on the UNESCO World Heritage List in 2003, contains one of the most visually extraordinary geological formations in the world. The Bungle-Bungle Range, a landscape of beehive-shaped sandstone towers, banded in alternating orange and black horizontal stripes that rise from the surrounding plateau in forms so geometrically regular that first-time visitors consistently describe them as appearing artificial. The geological explanation for the Bungle-Bungles is well established in its broad outlines. The towers are formed from Devonian sandstone, approximately 350 million years old, shaped by a combination of physical weathering along vertical joint planes and the differential resistance to erosion of silicate-cemented and algae-covered horizontal bands. But what researchers studying the site, including work by geomorphologists published through Curtin University and the Geological Survey of Western Australia, have found difficult to explain fully, is the rate and pattern of erosion that produced the current landscape. The Bungle-Bungles appear, from the geological evidence, to have developed their current dramatic morphology within a geologically brief period, perhaps as little as 20 million years, and possibly less. which for the formation of structures of this scale and regularity is considered rapid. The forces that produced this accelerated transformation remain debated among geomorphologists who specialize in arid zone, sandstone, erosion. More significantly for this list, the landscape contains evidence of human use and sacred significance extending back tens of thousands of years in the records of the Jija and Kaja peoples, whose country this is, and the specific ways in which the towers were used, avoided, approached, and incorporated into ceremonial geography, suggest an understanding of the landscape's formation history that is encoded in relationships between people and place, rather than an explanatory narrative. What destroyed the earlier, flatter landscape that preceded the Bungles, and what specific combination of forces drove its transformation into the extraordinary formation that exists today, is a question that the geological record is still in the process of answering. Number 2. The Darwin glass field and the aerial burst that science cannot locate. In the rainforest and button grass plains of western Tasmania, scattered across an area of approximately 400 square kilometers, there is a field of natural glass, unlike any other on the Australian continent. Darwin glass, named after the nearby Darwin River, rather than the scientist, consists of irregular fragments and aerodynamically shaped pieces of pale green to black glass formed by the fusion of local quartzite under conditions of extreme heat. The origin of Darwin glass has been investigated by researchers including Kieran Howard at the University of Tasmania and colleagues, and the published conclusion is that it was formed approximately 816,000 years ago by a meteorite impact or aerial burst event. The problem, and the reason this site belongs on a list of forces science is still trying to explain, is the crater, or rather, the absence of one. Despite systematic searches using aerial survey, satellite imagery, geophysical profiling, and ground truthing field campaigns, no impact crater corresponding to the Darwin glass event has been definitively identified. The scattered distribution of the glass, the absence of a central depression, and the lack of the shocked quartz that typically accompanies crater-forming impacts have led some researchers to favor an aerial burst interpretation, a Tunguska-type event in which the impactor exploded in the atmosphere and deposited its energy as thermal radiation across a wide area without creating a conventional crater. But an aerial burst, capable of fusing several cubic kilometers of surface rock into glass, would have been an event of energy several orders of magnitude larger than the Tunguska event of 1908 and the atmospheric physics of such an event. The mechanism by which thermal energy could be deposited selectively enough to fuse rock over a specific area while leaving other areas unaffected is not fully worked out in the published literature. For the Aboriginal Tasmanians who inhabited Western Tasmania for tens of thousands of years before and after the Darwin glass event, the glassy fragments scattered across the landscape were a resource of practical value, sharp enough for tool use, and available in a region with limited alternative sources of high-quality cutting material. The event that created them, 816,000 years ago, predates any human presence in Australia, but the glass itself became part of the human world, and the landscape that the event reshaped has been a human landscape for as long as humans have been in Tasmania. The force that made the glass is still, in the precise, scientific sense, unlocated. Number 1. The Wolf Creek Crater, and the memory of fire that burned across generations. In the Great Sandy Desert of Western Australia, visible from the air as a near-perfect circle of raised rim and central depression, approximately 880 meters in diameter, Wolf Creek Crater is the second largest crater in the world from which meteorite fragments have been recovered. It was formed approximately 300,000 years ago, predating human arrival in Australia, by the impact of an iron meteorite estimated at approximately 15 meters in diameter, traveling at approximately 15 kilometers per second. The energy released was equivalent to roughly 700 Hiroshima bombs, sufficient to excavate 360 meters of rock to a depth of 60 meters and to disperse impact ejecta across an area extending many kilometers from the impact point. The research on Wolf Creek Crater includes extensive geological work by the Geological Survey of Western Australia, isotopic analysis published by teams at multiple Australian universities, and geomorphological studies examining the crater's preservation state, which is exceptional given its age and the erosional conditions of the surrounding desert. The crater is known as Candamalel in the Jaru language, and the oral traditions of the Jaru and Walmajari peoples of the region include accounts of a star falling and creating the circular depression in the landscape, with associated narrative elements describing the fire and the transformation of the surrounding country. Research by Dwayne Hammaker at the University of Melbourne, examining Aboriginal Australian traditions, describing impact events, has analyzed the Kandamala tradition as one of the clearest cases in the global literature of an oral tradition preserving accurate, geographic, and causal information about a geological event, even one that occurred hundreds of thousands of years before human presence in the region, through a mechanism that researchers have termed mythological fossilization, the encoding of landscape features and their unusual characteristics into narrative frameworks that explain them in culturally meaningful terms, while preserving the essential physical fact of their origin. What science is still trying to explain at Wolf Creek is not the impact itself, but the thermal anomalies within and around the crater that periodic geophysical surveys have detected without fully characterizing. The crater floor contains areas of altered rock whose thermal history does not fit cleanly inside the post-impact geological model developed for the site. And several episodes of unexplained heat-related surface modification have been noted in the survey literature without receiving the targeted follow-up investigation that would be required to resolve them. Wolf Creek Crater sits at the intersection of three kinds of knowledge about the forces that shape this continent: the geological knowledge of an impact event, reconstructed from rock and isotope and crater morphology; the indigenous knowledge of a landscape feature, encoded in tradition and maintained across generations by communities whose relationship to country includes the obligation to remember; and the contemporary scientific uncertainty about specific features of the site that the existing models do not fully account for. None of these three kinds of knowledge is complete on its own. The crater is real. The fire that made it was real. And the full explanation of everything it contains, geological, cultural, and physical, is not yet written. The 8 sites on this list sit at the frontier of explanation, the zone where the evidence is clear and the mechanism is not, where researchers are honest about what they know and honest about what they do not. That zone is uncomfortable for institutions built on the authority of established knowledge, but it is where the most interesting science lives. Australia's ancient geology, its extraordinary preservation of both physical and cultural records of past events, and the depth of its human history, make it one of the most productive places on Earth for generating exactly this kind of productive uncertainty. The forces that shaped this continent did not stop when humans arrived. They continued, and they were witnessed, and in some cases, that witnessing was preserved in forms of knowledge that Western science is only now developing the tools to read. If the space between what we know and what we are still figuring out is the most interesting place in any conversation, this continent will keep you busy for a very long time. Stay with this channel. The questions are far from finished.